my family. For the movie with tons of impeccable line readings, that might be my favorite from a random bit actor. Do you guys still, like, whenever you see Martin Lawerence, you automatically say to yourselves, Mike Lowry?
Oh, absolutely, Lowry. He really makes a meal out of that pronunciation.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's so fun.
And he makes the movie, right? Welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of the film from conception to production all the way to release and reception. We are doing I don't even know what number this is in Absurdist Action, but it's, I don't know, like 4, 5? I don't even know.
Yeah, we're in the 90s, man. Yeah.
The 1990s is what we're doing. We're doing Bad Boys and The Legend of the Drunken Master, or Drunken Master II officially, I believe. We do have a special guest. Chris, why don't you introduce him?
Yeah, so Harry was introduced through a friend of mine. He is from the Trylove Podcast, and he's right here in Minneapolis with me. So thank you, Harry, for joining us. Introduce yourself and the pod that you do.
Hey, thanks so much. I do a podcast called Trylove. There's a little movie theater in South Minneapolis called the Trylon that me and my friends go to around 3 times a week, and we always ended up outside of it discussing the movies for too long afterward. They would shut off the lights, and so we decided to make it into a podcast. So that's what that's all about. And I've been on Film Trace once before for the Wes Anderson movies, the French Dispatch and Royal Tenenbaums, and that was so much fun that I really, really wanted to come back. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks.
To talk about Bayhem, of course, right?
Yeah.
Is it too early to bring that out already? Come on, guys.
What a 180 when it comes to 90s directors, from Wes Anderson to Michael Bay. That's
just 2 auteurs, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I think we gotta this is when we have to air our biases on Michael Bay.
Let's get it out there.
Where do you want to start? I mean, I've always hated him. For a very long time. Never liked it. Never liked pretty much anything he did until 13 Hours, which I love as a movie.
Jesus Christ.
Which I made Chris watch one time. And how did you feel about it, Chris?
I still, you're an enigma wrapped in a whatever they say in JFK. When it comes to that movie, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like there was the Zack Snyder reappraisal when his Justice League cut came out for whatever reason. And it seemed like when Bay's Ambulance came out earlier this spring, there was some reappraisal of his style.
People are really coming around on Bay.
What? I don't realize this happened. Have you guys seen Ambulance?
I haven't seen Ambulance yet, but
I've heard
that there's some amazing drone shots. People really like the drone shots in
There's
that movie.
A lot of drone shots. I mean, as someone who, obviously you got to respect some of his craft. You can't not. But Ambulance is easily one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life. It's not even close. Like, it's really bad. So that surprises me that people watched that film and were like, "Oh, we need to reappraise it," because there's nothing to reappraise there. It's like it's pretty.
Get his ass! Hell yeah!
Yeah. Hey, what about you? What's your Chris?
Man.
Did you finish?
Oh yeah, Chris.
What's
please.
your feeling?
Well, I mean, it is complicated, much more complicated than just like, I love him except for this one bad, war propaganda movie. But I and this is gonna be hard for me. I'm gonna have to have some real eat my just desserts, I think, in this episode, because I watched Bad Boys, the first one, probably more than any other action movie in the 90s growing up.
Really?
I know this movie kind of forwards and backwards, but I don't know why I love it so much, so I'll probably be untangling that. But when it comes to all the rest, I have yet to be able to sit through more than half an hour of a Transformers movie. I saw Armageddon when it came out, but even as a kind of impressionable teenager, I could tell that it was crap and didn't really revisit it, except for Schadenfreude purposes. But I don't know what it is about Bad Boys, his debut feature, that still has such a hold on me. But I'm sure we're going to get into that. What about you, Harry?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we're starting here because I hadn't seen Bad Boys since I think literally the 90s.
Nice.
This was my second time seeing it, and honestly, it's such a strange movie because I think personally, hot take. Sorry, Chris. It's a pretty terrible movie, right? But legitimately, though, there's a lot of really, really fascinating directing going on in it.
Mhm.
It's like very much an auteur sort of like push, especially for a debut feature. It's like it really doesn't look like a lot of stuff that came before.
Right.
I guess the Bayhem, as you called it, Daniel, is like really evident here. Like it really changes the way that you think about like an action movie. So I think it makes a lot of sense that you guys are covering it on this. All that is to say, I've always really disliked Bay also. Even like reading your great show notes, like just his interview answers always make my skin crawl. Like he's just a prick. And like, I know that like a bunch of those guys, the old heads are like conservative, but he's like the conservative filmmaker. It's just like I like The Rock a lot though, so hey.
Yeah.
there's always that.
Where do you want to dive into Bad Boys here? Do we even need a synopsis? Everybody knows this movie, right?
I feel like they should, but like I mentioned, I know this movie very well, and I probably last watched it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, just for funsies, and yet like putting my podcaster hat on for this most recent rewatch, I was just like, this has kind of become the realization, I think, for a lot of these episodes in the Absurdist Action theme that we're focusing on for this cycle of Film Trace, which is that I might go so far as to make the argument that Bad Boys is a comedy more than it is an action movie.
But explain that a little bit more. We need to go deeper on that.
Yes.
What do you mean by this?
I like it. It's a good take, but I want to know
Thank
more.
you. So you've got the buddy cop genre, which we will dive into even further next episode with 48 Hours, even though neither of them are technically cops in that movie, but it's still that dynamic, right? And then it doubled and redoubled with Beverly Hills Cop and Lethal Weapon. And this was kind of the first take on that, where number one, you had both roles originally going to comedians. Jon Lovitz and Dana Carvey were the original.
Can you imagine?
It makes no sense.
It's unreal to think about that.
No,
I think Bay did like a test shoot with those guys. Did I get this right somewhere?
I think so. Yeah,
I gotta figure out where I found that. I think it's but yeah, that's crazy that was supposed to be them.
Right, and it's basically so much of the plot is not even centered around the drug they're trying to find the drugs that got taken from the police department, right? The evidence room. But a lot more, I feel like, of the tension between characters, of like the goings-ons of the day-to-day in their journey. Obviously the drugs are just a MacGuffin. It's a comedy of errors, right? It literally is just like an extended sitcom premise of two guys that are pretending to be each other.
I really like this because this really gets at something that I noticed, which is that, like, I mean, to say that this movie strains credulity is kind of a huge understatement, right? But like, what I kept taking away was that, like, and I think this is somewhat of a hallmark of sort of like classic madcap comedies, right? Is that there was such tenuous in-universe reasons for these two characters to act this way at any point, and they are constantly referring back to their own sort of character traits. Like they have a character sheet that everybody knows about, right? Like everybody's always talking about how Will Smith's character is smooth, and then like Martin Lawrence's character is obviously supposed to contrast this, and they're clearly supposed to be the odd couple, and like they set that up at the beginning, and it's like they would often get into arguments that were so like broadly constructed and fabricated for the purposes of having an argument, that there were entire scenes that had no narrative momentum outside of the bit, right? Like, a big one I'm thinking about is like the the dude at the liquor store that like sees that they're black guys with weapons, which also woo. And he, like,
90s.
yeah, he like
Yeah,
sticks him up, and then they have to like they get into an argument while he's got the gun going, and it's like this is like you're right. It's like we've entered into this is not an action movie. This is like something that you would expect to see. It's like Rush Hour at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, guy, I mean, like, does that hold the film together, or is it the action set pieces? We're talking about Michael Bay here,
right?
I mean, I would say a comedy is at least sort of writer first.
Yeah, and it would have to be funny if it were a comedy.
It's funny you mentioned that because, like, there's a great GQ oral history of Michael Bay, which is where I got like half my notes from. But there's one where the vice president of Bay Films is like, yeah, there was no script for Bad Boys.
Right.
Yeah,
Nothing.
I know. I saw that note, and apparently a ton of it was improvised, right? Like,
like the scene you're talking about was a lot of that was improv, which I think is like, looking back on this movie, I probably saw this, probably in the 90s, like same as Harry, but this time around is like, oh, this is way funnier to me than it was back then. Right? It was like the chemistry between Martin Lawrence and Will Smith is just off the charts. Like
it really is.
It's the engine of the movie. So yeah, I mean, I could buy that it's maybe a comedy action film as opposed to an action comedy.
Well, I kind of like what you said about the writing though, because I mean, I think that like this is a really, again, it's kind of interesting because it has like 2 A+ actors, right? Like both of these guys really kill it in these roles, and it's got really fascinating directing that makes it feel like this wild comic book that is never rooted in reality. And honestly, like one of the big takeaways that I found really effective was that like the editing and the shot choices and the cutting, it made some of the like objectionable stuff not objectionable to me. Like I was really along for the ride in this movie, and I think that the directing got me there, along with the charisma of the actors. But the script is rough, right? Like it's really, really bad. The actual writing of this movie is really, really bad. Kind of like unsavably bad, even though they kind of gave it a really good attempt, right?
Yeah, but isn't this a Bayism though? Like, can we look to any of his movies that were well written?
No,
none of them. Like,
and that's
the Island's terrible. I mean, it's all just.
I keep being curious about this, but I still have not seen it. Have either of you seen Pain and Gain?
That's the one that people talk about, right?
Right.
I haven't seen it. I
Wait, is
apologize.
it a good thing? I thought it was like supposed to be his worst movie.
No, it's supposed to be his best.
I gotta watch it now. No, that's really not true. I tried to watch it. I tried to watch it for like 20 minutes. I was like, I can't do it. Like, I'm checking out. Like,
but the connection is twofold, I think. Here I am, like being a complete idiot talking about a movie I haven't even seen. But it also takes place in Miami, and it also supposedly heavily relies on like the chemistry between the leads, which is Wahlberg, Dwayne Johnson, and Anthony Mackie. And I really think that if you look at, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say I enjoy The Rock, but I mean, Nicolas Cage saves a lot of that movie.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
you can watch it.
Yeah, so like I do think it does come down to like that chemistry, and I don't know. I mean, the drone shots were definitely the majority of the discourse about Ambulance, but I don't know. Is it possible that Jake Gyllenhaal and Yahya Abdul-Mateen III have chemistry there? But whereas like
they don't
probably not. Okay, but like Armageddon, there's no chemistry with that huge ensemble, even though there's tons of great people there. Pearl Harbor, same thing, even though it's not as many good people.
Pearl Harbor, wow,
right?
That's a tough watch. That's a real tough watch.
That's a challenging film.
So I think that ultimately, and I could see this in my rewatch of Bad Boys, like you can tell who's just showing up for work and reading their terrible lines versus, Will and Martin that are really like trying to make this, random scene work. And I would argue Joe Pantoliano is, pulling his weight as well.
Man.
Yeah, he's definitely vital to
Does
this
your
movie.
heart just jump like a mile high whenever you see that dude show up in a movie? I was so excited when I saw his name in the credits. And then freaking Chrissy, Michael Imperioli was in this too, and I was like, it's a Sopranos reunion.
Yeah.
Man, some really great casting choices. And then there's Tia Leone, who's also in this movie.
The end of sentence. Yeah.
I mean, she's not. Come on, she's not
bad. She
holds her own.
Listen, I like Tia Leone. It's wild miscasting. Like, I don't know what that character is supposed to be. She's like this vegetarian, true. And the wildly misogynistic script makes her like extremely annoying and shrill. Yeah. And everybody's constantly telling her to shut up and that she's crazy. Right.
Like playing with the phone cord and her feet on the bed.
Yeah.
And like everybody going out of their way to make sure that we know that she's not a hooker, just her friend who is dead is. Yeah.
But the black woman. That about? We have to be very clear that the black woman who gets shot in Will Smith kind of pretends to be upset about it for a scene, and then it's up again.
It's so sad.
Yeah, right. It's horrible, right? That's what I'm saying is that like it was kind of remarkable that like I find this movie to be like deeply misogynistic, like even by Michael Bay standards, it's pretty misogynistic, and also like it's absolutely wild in 2022 to watch this movie about cops who like really exalt and break the rules. And breaking the rules, and specifically like there are several scenes where they brag about / compare their body counts as in the number of human beings that they've killed on the job.
Right. I misinterpreted that so much on this rewatch that I was like, oh, that's interesting. They want to have the lower body count, but then I was like, oh no, that's not what they're saying.
I mean, I think that's kind of how it's framed, right? But it's like they're finger wagging each other. They're like, oh yeah, you're the responsible one. How many people have you killed on the job? And he's like, not as many as you.
Okay. It's a gray area. Also, that scene, and I think it was in the trailer too. The like where Martin Lawrence pretends to be puts on the white voice and asks for brown sugar as they are breaking and entering somebody's home. Yeah. That played very differently for me too. I was like, I remember just like laughing so hard at that. I'm like, no, they are going against so many protocols.
I mean, what's interesting about this, dude, like what I didn't know is if you just saw this movie, I think, and you didn't really have a background and, knew a lot about Michael Bay or whatever, didn't see when it came out, it seems like a big movie.
Yeah.
Right. It has a very sort of wide angle view. The explosion, the set pieces, it's Michael Bay doing his thing, but it's a small budget movie.
Yeah.
Like $19 million.
That's wild to me.
That makes no sense to me.
I mean, again, to his credit, like, especially because Will Smith's in it, I guess, but like this looks like a giant movie.
Oh, it looks massive. And there's all this stuff about, Sony didn't believe in it. And there's a lot of reasons. You talk about racism.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't want two black guys as a lead because they thought it wouldn't play internationally. That's still a problem today. Happens all the time. They're like, we're not going to put them in the lead because it's not going to play in like, this
China,
part of Europe or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But
to Michael Bay's great credit, right? Like he is characteristically arrogant about that in interviews, but like I kind of think he's right? Like I think that like making a big black movie like this with like black movie stars and having it do as well as it did was like a really, really big deal for like movies at that time, right? So like that is a great like feather in this movie's cap, I guess.
Yeah, we could have had Dana Carvey and Jon Lovitz.
Yeah, like unbelievable.
How does that even work?
And also at some point when either, I don't know if it was Carvey or Lovitz, or maybe both of them had dropped out, they were trying to get Arsenio Hall in one of the roles.
Yeah, which maybe could have worked.
Yeah. I mean, he's fantastic in Coming to America. Let's not talk about the sequel. But I mean, you mentioned the budget piece, and it's just insane to think about, how huge a star Will Smith became, like in less than a year. Like Independence Day comes out less than a year after Bad Boys, and it's like set in stone that he's the king of Hollywood, right?
You guys remember when that came out? It was like, he's like an A-lister all of a sudden. You're like, wait, how did this happen? Amazing.
And not to like sideline Martin Lawrence, who has, had a not so great career of the last 20 years, but he's also just been like, that's the thing I've seen in interviews, especially with the third very, very lackluster Bad Boys for Life that came out a couple of years ago, where it's like, he got to a place where he was comfortable just like not doing much. So it seemed, I don't know. It's
right. Like you'd love to hear that. That's fantastic.
Right. Yeah. Like I love, even though I did not like the movie, I love the press circuit, because I was like clicking on link after link of different interviews. Every single interview, his first response to the question of like, what did you do to prepare for this movie? He's like, not much. I ate a lot of food. I used stuntmen this time. Like it was, I'm 54. Get off my case.
Here's one question I had. I think you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but there's a precedent here of 48 hours, which we're going to talk about on the next episode. What are some other precedents here for this movie? Where's the lineage go back to?
Oh man.
I mean, that's the thing that strikes me about this movie, is that it is, not only is it Bay's first movie, but it does sort of herald in a new style of filmmaking. The transition of a lot of these commercial filmmakers, David Fincher is another one. I think they went to school together or something. This very quick, flashy, kind of a transition in Hollywood to something different. Can we think of anything that would come before this that links to this?
I mean, Bruckheimer directed this, right? How many movies did he or not directed, produced this, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How many movies did he have under his belt at this point? Because he,
so many.
I mean, he did Top Gun in '86. Yeah. Let's see. When was Con Air? He didn't direct Con Air though, right? He just produced it.
It was a year after this.
That was after I kept being reminded of Con Air watching this. Almost it's like a postmodern take on action movies, right? Where it's like, we know what self-awareness is. We've had self-aware movies. Now we're going through self-awareness to the other side, which is like, we kind of are self-aware, but we're never going to talk about it. It's just going to be, it's like, what did Quentin Tarantino say about how his movies are like the movies people in movies watch at the movies? This is like that, but like another degree of abstraction, right? Where it's just like, oh, like this is like a literal comic book that somebody brought to life.
Yeah, the comic book concept definitely rings very true here, because it's just everything's turned up to 11. Everything's played for the explosion. There's something about it that it feels different. And to me personally, I hate this style of film.
Yeah.
Right? Like from the opening shot, I couldn't get over how the close-up that he was doing.
Just like close-up.
It was so bizarre.
It's jarring.
Especially after watching Thunderbolt and Lightfoot.
Yeah.
I was like, well, this is gorgeous. This is like a painting. And then I got a close up of Martin Lawrence's nose, like right up his nose. Like, what is like the style of this film? It's so brute force.
Yeah.
Sure. It's actually interesting. I don't disagree with you, but I think I might I think especially this time around, it kind of worked for me. It's so kinetic and fluid, right? Like, I think that like your relationship to this movie is so sculpted by the directing rather than the script, or rather than even the characters. Like, I felt at such a distance from the actual sort of like narrative dramatic stakes happening in this movie. I never for an instant forgot I was watching a movie, right? Yes. But I don't think that like he wanted you to, right? Like, right. I think that like the diverting aspect of how quick and fluid and constantly in motion this movie is, there is something going on there that feels intentional and feels a little bit like an auteur move to me. You know what I mean?
Oh, there's tons of intention there, without a doubt. Like, he is definitely sculpting a very specific style that I think comes more from his commercial work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's like the editing. I think I was looking this up. I just became obsessed with like this metric of, what is it, average shot length or whatever.
Oh yeah.
at 2.8 seconds, which is just like, think about that. Every 2.8 seconds of Bad Boys. Bad Boys 2 is 2.23.
And then Armageddon's really low as well, right?
I think so. Yeah, I gotta look it up.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
But I guess the point that I was trying to get across is like, I think the average now in a film is 2.5.
So Bay won.
Bay won.
He knew what was coming.
Oh, absolutely. And there's some great video I found online where someone was basically warning, some like a big old filmmaker was basically warning that this is the future. Like, this is what people want to see. I'm not saying it's bad or it's good. I'm just saying that, like, this was probably the harbinger of that change, right?
That's really interesting.
It's just, oh man, like you said, it's kinetic filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like overstimulus, right? Like, that's got to be a part of it, is that like people responded to this because it's like what, and this is going to make me sound terribly old and out of touch, but it's like with video games, right? Where it's just like, it's just tickling that part of your brain, like immediate gratification. And it's like when you make the colors go so fast and Will Smith is being charming at 700 miles an hour, it's like a drug, right? It just like the serotonin just hits.
I do. There's a really comprehensive interview with Bay in, of all places, Fandango.com. But he gets really intense with describing the tensions that were on set when he was trying to do a lot of these. Like, he would literally like hit, tell, roll action and then call cut, and everybody's like, no, like, that's not how you do it. Like, you've got to have lead time and you got to let it breathe a little bit, and he's like, no, that's how fast I want it cut, so why would I keep filming? And he said that it was not only because that's what he wanted, and because he was very conscious. He says, I was always trying to give the shot some energy. And
right. That's a perfect descriptor, right? Like, absolutely, this movie is supercharged with that.
But like, say what you will about it, like how full of himself he is, and he is, but he was also very conscious of like how little he got budget wise. And he said the other advantage to doing it this way was to, quote, hide the cheap art direction coming at you from left and right. And I mean, and we see this right with like the shaky cam stuff in the 2000s, Paul Greengrass and all that, where it's like, it makes no sense, and it might like literally give you a headache, but it's, budget friendly, and it does like add to the feel that the director's aiming for.
Yeah, you're right, Daniel. It's like I was struggling to come up with precursors, but I can think of 300 movies that this is a direct ancestor to, right?
Yeah, the other thing that like pops in my head is like Beverly Hills Cop and Lethal Weapon, but those are definitely slower movies.
Right.
Yeah,
they don't have this style.
I don't think you would, just like you wouldn't have Bay without Bruckheimer behind him, you wouldn't have Bay or Bruckheimer without Tony Scott coming out of the woodwork in the 80s, right? And that's the clear viewpoint of the Beverly Hills Cop stuff and Top Gun, but it's also, I think, like if you look back at even just 5 years earlier, Days of Thunder, where that's literally a movie about like moving so fast. And even though I don't have a great recollection or fondness for it, you can't deny, like, there's a reason why there was an outpouring, even though Tony Scott like was very much like a workman, like that's not an overused word on this podcast, director when it came to like action movies and like just blockbusters, just trying to do his job. I mean, there was an outpouring of love and support from all corners of the industry when he passed, and it wasn't just because like he was a force in the industry. It's because like he was one of the forces in the industry. And I would say, just to finish my comment, that not only Tony Scott but also John McTiernan is probably another big precursor to Bay. And just 2 years before Bad Boys, he did Last Action Hero, and of course he did Die Hard and Predator. So, and I think I recently rewatched Last Action Hero for some dumb reason.
It's a great movie.
No, it's really bad. But
I wanted to push that for this series, but
I know you did. I couldn't.
I always think about the line where he comes up to a henchman and he goes, "Do you want to be a farmer?" There's a couple of acres, and he just kicks the dude and he just goes fucking flying through the air. Amazing. Yeah.
What is there something different about what he's doing now? Those are all precursors, no doubt.
Yeah.
But like there's like a little sort of verve here that like it's just maybe it's turned up more.
Yeah, no, I think that's what it is, right? Like I think he saw like even like hyper stylized movies like The Driver or something, or you know, or Days of Thunder or Top Gun, and he was like, "Hold my beer," right? Like I'm like the new kid, and I'm going to show you how it's done, right? Like this is like the logical conclusion to sort of a fragmentation of like long cinema in favor of the sort of like immediate gratification, instantaneous
ADD
release.
cinema,
right? Exactly. It really is. It's hyper cinema.
And it's funny, like going back to like how intense he was on set. There's a great Bruckheimer quote where he goes like, the first day of filming, Bay did 40 setups. A normal director does about 10.
Yeah,
so really lucky. Like that. Yeah, there's like I think it's the thing that I actually admire about Bay. I don't necessarily love his style all the time, but his drive and his intensity to really, you know, the fact that this was filmed for $19 million doesn't make any sense to me. And the only reason it looks that way is 100% because of Bay.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like,
I mean, you would have thought that the
$19
million just would have been his Coke budget for this movie.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe it was, right? But like,
yeah, he did go over budget. It seems
it really is amazing. Just like I think Daniel, you said brute force. That's a really good term for that. It's interesting that he became the sort of like industry darling after this. But you can kind of see the early roots of that, definitely.
Holy shit, I just looked it up. They gave him $75 million to do The Rock the next year.
Oh wow.
But how does that even work? Well, it's Sony because Sony fought with them, right?
Yeah.
They're sort of like, hey, you can't do this shoot. There's the whole story, which he probably made up. He wrote a check to do this action scene. He didn't get the money back till afterwards. The other thing about Bay, he's an incredible self-promoter. Yeah. He creates his own myth about himself, about what he's doing, to make it sort of as grandiose as his films, right?
Yeah.
He kind of lives like he makes his art. You know, like, I don't know, like going back to sort of thinking about it's clearly a very influential film, but looking back on it, outside of, say, the technical evolution that I think was sort of a leap here, is there anything else to grab onto? We talked about sort of, you know, two black men as the centerpiece here. That's big.
Yeah.
Right? That's huge in the 90s.
Especially Will Smith. I mean, to see Will Smith before he became Will Smith, or like right when he was on the cusp of becoming Will Smith, I guess, is really something. Also, the thing you just said about like how Michael Bay was given how much for The Rock just like a year later.
Right. 75. Yeah.
It's like that in and of itself is a fascinating piece of film history, just to think that. It also kind of makes me sad. It's like, man, remember when movies were like a really big deal? Yeah. And like people wanted to move fast because they were like a huge like business, and they weren't just Marvel movies and Disney and streaming services. And like, it's so fascinating to me to think about the fact that like there were directors who were sort of like mainlined so quickly into the like public consciousness just on the back of like one $19 million movie, that like all of a sudden the next year they're making blockbusters, right? It's like that does not happen anymore. That
and a rated R blockbuster too.
Yeah, and it was The Rock, which is a fucking weird blockbuster.
Yeah, it's pretty strange. But I mean, Bad Boys was a huge hit. I mean, like I was looking at the box office, like, I mean, adjusted worldwide did $275 million.
And a lot of that's overseas too, right?
Which was what Sony was worried about.
Exactly. Right. And one quick note about Will Smith before we get too far away from him. There's this really interesting capsule of Vibe. They reprinted their entire 95 cover story with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. And you know, Smith, he even though he was coming from TV and he was not a star yet, like he had his choices
for sure
available to him, his options for how he wanted to get, you know, to become that star. So it's interesting that Bad Boys is the one that he landed on and chose, especially considering, how much trouble the script had been in development for so long. But he had a interesting quote, especially considering where cinema has gone more recently. He said back in 95 that when he chose Bad Boys because he wanted something that could be as real as possible. Because,
right, I saw that.
yeah, he says what makes you an effective superhero in a film is that you don't want to be one, like Bruce Willis in Die Hard. Last thing he wanted to do was run over that glass barefoot. People can't relate to a guy who just jumps in front of bullets, which I don't know if I fully get what he's saying there, because there is definitely there's a huge amount of machismo in both the Die Hard character and the Bad Boys characters. But I think what it comes down to is like one of the reasons Marvel has taken over cinema is because it's quips and explosions, right? Like that there is a definite through line, and it doesn't matter what race the protagonists are. It doesn't even matter who gets in the suit. Like nobody cared that it was Robert Downey Jr. in the Iron Man suit. Nobody cared. It's just like and you have somebody behind the camera like Bay who's thinking larger than life, and it's, even though it's trash, it's still cinema magic, and it's both frustrating and incredible.
It's just sort of like unabashed, like no lies commercial filmmaking, right? It's just like, this is here to appeal to the masses and to make tons of money. And like that is why it was created, and that is why we do it, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's sort of like really like, I don't know if that is Bad Boys necessarily, right? Because I think that this was probably more of a passion project as his debut, but that's kind of what it led to, and it's effective at delivering that, right?
Yeah, and it's just, of all the things to kind of start this domino effect, you get the movie that Jon Lovitz passed on because the script was a mess.
But it kind of makes sense though on some level, because like that movie would have been like an 80s-ish thing.
Right.
And then when you put Martin Lawrence and Will Smith in here and you get Michael Bay involved, it all of a sudden becomes like a 90s paradigm.
Yeah.
Just like pure action, pure adrenaline. And then, you turn it down a bit for some comedy, and then you turn it right back up.
Yeah.
And it works. I mean, it really, when we started to talk about absurdist action movies, we started like action comedies, like this is the one that came to mind first.
Yeah.
It's essential, right? It's yeah.
It really defines what we're trying to talk about, right?
Right.
And now, no, go ahead.
No, okay, you were going to do the segue, which is a perfect spot for it. But I can't not mention this because our previous episode, the main film we talked about was Hot Fuzz. And
oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
There's a literal like textual connection there with Bad Boys 2, yes. Yeah. But the shot that we see in Bad Boys 2 through the lens of Nick Frost and Simon Pegg's characters in Hot Fuzz is the pretty iconic circle trolley shot that Bay redoes for the sequel, and that he began getting. It's so just like seminal that it becomes to the point where it's like. It's that moment, and we talked about this a little bit with self-aware horror a couple cycles ago, and we even talked about a little bit with like the self-awareness of existential thrillers. And you mentioned David Fincher and like The Game, where it's like you got to have a sense of playfulness to it. I mean, I think I would like to hear your guys' thoughts. Maybe we can save them when we incorporate them with Jackie Chan in a bit here, because I think it kind of applies to him too. Is he trying to like be a parody of himself? Is there a self-awareness there with Bay?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I think there's zero with self-awareness.
That just the melodrama of that circle trolley shot, and the fact that like he had to like, that he just like came up with it in the moment, makes it feel like, he is, I don't know. Maybe
to me, he's just fulfilling this sort of like teenage boy fantasy.
Yeah.
And there's some quote in here, and I forget where it was, of one of the producers where they kind of saw him once filming this really attractive woman. And they looked over at him, and where does it go? There was a look in his eyes like he had reached nirvana. It was childlike wonderment. I don't think there's a lot going on there, unless you're watching 13 Hours, which is a different story.
Oh my god!
Wow. I think he's transcended the self-awareness, irony, event horizon, or binary. I think that there's great power in shamelessness. Yes. Right? I think that he wouldn't ever give. I mean, he's sort of this is a deeply weird comparison, but it's sort of like the David Lynch mystique, where it's does David Lynch think about this stuff? What does he put into his movies? Is it all just his dreams? It's sort of is Michael Bay self-aware? Does he know that he's so juvenile and silly? It's it works, doesn't it? And I think that's about as far as he gets, right? It's I'm going to keep doing the thing that works, and I don't care to examine it.
I've not seen a lot of holding up the mirror at all. Let's jump to our chaser movie, which is a Legend of Drunken Master, aka Drunken Master II, which technically came out in 1994 in China, Hong Kong, but didn't come out in the United States till 2000. Where do we begin? I'm gonna self admit here, I don't know much about Hong Kong action movies or kung fu movies in general. This and the first Drunken Master are probably the two that I saw for the first time in my life.
Okay.
So I need Harry, I feel like you guys did an episode on this. I feel like I need your take first to sort of ground us.
That's really interesting because Drunken Master 2 is a really fascinating movie within the history of Hong Kong action, right? Yeah. Because it was 3/4 directed by Kar-leung, who is arguably the most famous Hong Kong martial arts movie director. He did 36 Chamber of Shaolin. He did the first Drunken Master. He did a bunch of stuff along with Gordon Liu. And it really shows up. But then 3/4 of the way through this movie, he was fired by Jackie Chan, the star, and Jackie Chan took over directing. And Chris, I think this was in your notes, but they filmed this movie sequentially. In scene order, which is kind of unusual, but apparently that's how they did Hong Kong movies. And you can tell the moment that it snaps, right? There are two directors in this movie, and they're two directors who know a ton about how to direct martial arts movies, but they're interested in different things, right? And so you kind of this movie in and of itself is this microcosm education on the old guard versus the new guard, where the thing about Kar-leung is he was the best of the Hong Kong action movie directors, right? So he knows how to shoot a coherent action movie scene that showcases the actors and the choreography, and he knows how to incorporate dynamic environment and environmental storytelling within the frame. And Jackie Chan is also very interested in those things, but he's also Buster Keaton, and he also has Hollywood experience, and he also has comedy experience, right? So when Jackie Chan takes over, all of a sudden the cuts ramp way up, the zooms ramp way up. The comedy is highlighted, especially the physical comedy, because he's the physical comedian that he is. And it's really fascinating that we get to see two different styles. And I think one of you called this sort of the last gasp of Hong Kong action cinema. You can kind of see it fade away in real time in this movie, in a sense, right? At least, yeah. I mean, and it's really interesting, especially because Jackie Chan is the perfect carry through for that, right? Because he is the guy who has his feet in both markets. And I think that this movie was, especially because it's a sequel to the first Drunken Master, it's really self-conscious about all of that.
Yeah, I'm also pretty new to this world of cinema. I think that the number one thing that stood out to me that I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on is you have, yes, action and yes, comedy, but there's also, there's this huge backstory and history to it, especially the character that Jackie Chan plays, both in this and the previous movie. And it should probably be noted. I mean, I kind of just assumed this based on cursory research, but like when it was released in the US for the first time in 2000, and the name changed to The Legend of Drunken Master, is that kind of an attempt to just like help it be an entry point, not make Americans think they need to like track down this 1978 kung fu movie,
which like and especially because like the first Drunken Master is like very, very much a 1970s kung fu movie.
Yes,
it's like much more standard than this is, and of genre than this is.
It felt so different. Oh my god! When
I know,
I was like, this is how is this a sequel to this? I mean, I get that there's a long time. But the style is so different. Like, it is just a completely different universe, it feels like. And
there's this like sense of like there's just like this largesse to Drunken Master 2 that is just when you think it's not going to go to another like set or location, it goes there. And just when you think it won't have like a more absurd set piece, you know, he brings out the bamboo stick, and what I had grown up with in terms of like martial arts, like absurdist action, was, you know, the American stuff, Van Damme, Seagal. And so like, and Brandon Lee, and, you know, my brother showed me Enter the Dragon when I was little, but like, there's so much of that kind of size of movie making here that it was eye-opening. It was like literally is like looking into a completely different world, kind of like seeing your first Bollywood movie, or seeing you know, what's going on in is it Nigeria with like the low budget action movies there. And it's just like, it's incredible how huge this world feels, and yet it still very much is like, even with the ridiculous amount of set pieces and action, ultimately, I think your connection to Buster Keaton is spot on. And I think that's what, you know, the Trylove Theater literally did, right? Is when they were showing both Chan and Keaton movies, kind of threaded together, which is like, you kind of, it's like that birth of cinema thing where it's like, oh my gosh, this is what movies can be. And I mean, now, of course, I'm making a long list of the rest of Hong Kong cinema. I've got to see Shaolin, because like,
oh my god, you got to see 36 Chamber of Shaolin. That's one of the best movies ever made, man. Well, that's one of the great joys about Hong Kong cinema and like kung fu movies in general, is that every one of them is really in conversation with the other. I mean, like, kind of literally, right? Like, Golden Harvest was putting out like 6 of those bad boys a year during the golden age. It was wild. And like, it was Gordon Liu and I can't even think, Lau Kar-leung, and like a bunch of other guys that all knew each other, and they had all directed each other, and they were putting out these like products, right? Like, kung fu movies were like products for direct distribution into movie theaters to be seen shortly after they were filmed, right? And to make a budget. This movie feels like almost like it's looking back on that legacy a little bit, right? Because it's like, it gives you those moments of classic kung fu where the plot stops so that Jackie Chan can fight 4 guys, and Anita Mui can cheer him on and throw him wine, right? But like, also it transports them into sort of the modern context in so many ways, right? Where it's like, especially if you watch the weird dub of this movie, which is such a sort of square peg round hole situation, but like, even that tension is really fascinating, where it's like, oh, this is them trying to make a American action movie out of a Hong Kong kung fu movie, right? In a lot of ways. And it's, I think it's super triumphant, and it sort of like translates a lot of the tropes and signifiers of kung fu movies into that modern context in a really fascinating way.
What's crazy is I remember seeing Rumble in the Bronx.
I was going to say, that's
in
1995, year after, or 96, I think, in the US. I remember seeing it in the theater and kind of being blown away. Never seen Drunken Master 2 before. But what's so fascinating to me going back and watching this and kind of, being a sort of not super knowledgeable about Kung Fu or its history, it feels so different to the Jackie Chan that I know. So
interesting.
different. Because like Rumble in the Bronx is probably where I first saw him. I was like, "Oh, this is really cool," and that has a direct link to Drunken Master and the style of the incredibly elaborate fight scenes that are just beautiful. Watching Drunken Master 2, it's like, I kind of just want like it's not even on like DVD though, isn't it? Kind of like a lost print or something like that. You can't really get a lot of the versions.
I'm not
DVD.
sure. Yeah, I think
it's like one
true.
of those like things where it's like people are still pissed about it because you can't get a good version
especially
of it.
like the Cantonese version, right? Like the actual,
exactly. Yeah. But like it's so beautiful to see this. But then I think about Rush Hour, and I think about what came after that: Shanghai Noon, Rush Hour 2,
Kung Fu
Shanghai
Panda.
Nights. Like we're talking like what, and like that's I'm gonna loop back around to sort of Bad Boys a little bit. Like Rush Hour kind of feels like a mixture of kind of like Jackie Chan trying to get into that sort of the more, I guess he had super cop and stuff like that, but like the Lethal Weapon type stuff. What's that? There's a huge change there.
Right.
Like,
and I think that this is where the hands shake, right? Like, I think that like, I mean, Jackie Chan had been sort of like styling himself and being styled by major studios to be the sort of like Bruce Lee of kung fu action in China or in Hong Kong, right? Like Police Story is a lot like that, but you're right. Like this is really the bridge, right? Because it's like this is still very demonstrably a kung fu movie. And then like post this movie, we start to get like Jackie Chan's 90s and 2000s career in America, where he's like a comedy action star, right? I think that like that's really interesting to look into because it doesn't just sort of like reframe the way you think about Jackie Chan's later career. It can also reframe kung fu movies themselves a little bit, which was when we went back and watched a bunch of kung fu movies. That's what really stood out to me, is that the thing that Jackie Chan understands so well is that kung fu is hilarious, and it like always has been, and that's as much a point of the genre as being badass. I mean, like you can even go back to like 36 Chamber of Shaolin is a very, very funny movie. And like the kung fu is not just supposed to be sort of like awe-inspiring. It's supposed to be like weirdly expressive and humanizing, right?
Yes, like a dance almost.
And it makes the transition to comedy later in Jackie Chan's career, especially when you have this movie as sort of a keystone, it makes it make a lot more sense, I think.
Now, I'm kind of listening, like going back to Bad Boys. How is the comedy? Like I'm thinking about now more Drunken Master and Drunken Master 2, although the comedy is somewhat similar. How is the comedy different in this versus that? Doesn't it feel dramatically different?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
what's that separation?
You've got two sitcom stars doing a sitcom plot, and there's just happened to be tons of guns and explosions, right?
Yeah.
And like that's the other thing where, like I was kind of saying, like it feels like I'm opening my eyes to something that I didn't know was possible, because I think so many of the American films we've talked about for this cycle, 48 hours, like we keep coming back to the idea of like, oh yeah, like the action is part of what is the bones of the genre, and yet so much of it feels like perfunctory, where it's like, and we I think we'll continue to say this, and we'll definitely say this when we get to Thunderbolt and Lightfoot in the 70s, where it's like when it comes down to it, it's like two guys talking, right? And they have that chemistry, they have that connection, whereas here it's like, I mean, the reason that Keaton was who he was, the reason Chan is who he is because there is that like synergy, that magic of like combining, like where it's like this, and this is kind of what I was trying to allude to earlier, where it's like, I do think like Chan has a very analytical head when it comes down to both looking behind the camera, in front of the camera, how this is going to be exciting and how this is going to be hilarious. And like he would, obviously not want to literally get drunk to do drunken boxing, this style of kung fu, but he would, hold his breath to like mimic what that feels like to be like woozy and wobbly. And the fact that it's like I think you guys talked about this on your Trylove episode about Drunken Master 2, where it's like Harry like a dance more than it is like stand-up comedy like Eddie Murphy or Will Smith.
Yeah, it's expression, right? It's physical expression and storytelling using the body. And Jackie Chan has this great way of like transliterating that for a Western audience, because I think that's always been true, but getting into Jackie Chan movies is how I sort of discovered that in more classic kung fu movies, right? The other thing about it that's really interesting is that I think that one of the big differences is the lack of machismo in this movie, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that and this makes it sort of a really interesting pairing with Bad Boys, because like Drunken Master 2 is kind of explicitly about reframing the hero as not hyper masculine and not hyper competent and toxic in that way, right? Like I think both the original folktale that these are based on, the Drunken Master movies, and Jackie Chan's kind of whole thing is that he's a doofus, right? He's like kind of a silly fun guy that doesn't really know what's going on, but he's lovable and charming. And the whole sort of thematic through line of this movie is that guy can also be a kung fu master, or maybe that's what a kung fu master actually looks like, which is actually what a lot of kung fu movies are about. It's like, it's about the kid, right? Like even the Karate Kid's kind of like that. But it's about how you don't have to have that sort of like machismo, and that you can actually be more expressive, you know, like even kung fu itself is not like it can often look more humorous or graceful or feminine than something like boxing or certainly a gunfight, right? And like I think that physical storytelling is also interweaving with like the real sort of messages at play here, which is not to say like Jackie Chan had a gigantic ego, right? Like I'm not saying that he's not a problematic Hollywood figure, or that there aren't terrible masculine problems with the culture that produced kung fu movies, but there is something there, right? Like it is a different portrait of sort of like movie cool than Michael Bay's is.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to quickly say, like, to go back to the misogyny discussion regarding Bad Boys, and obviously regarding a lot of the movies that we're talking about for this cycle, from 48 Hours to even Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, right? Like, I think that's an important point to make, in addition to the fact that unlike all of these movies, except for better or worse, arguably Bullet Train, our new release with this cycle, but even there, it's still not as potent and egalitarian as it is here in Drunken Master 2, with the female characters. Like Anita Mui is, in many scenes, like arguably, you know, borderline shows Jackie Chan up.
Oh, dude, she absolutely steals this movie.
Yeah,
it's Jackie Chan in Jackie Chan's best movie doing what Jackie Chan does, and Anita Mui still takes it out from under her.
Right, she's so good.
I mean, that thing too that like stuck out to me and just watching it, it's just the mythology that's incorporated in these stories, right? There's like there's automatic depth that you're seeing like play out on screen, and the story feels inherently universal. I mean, what's universal about Bad Boys? Bad Boys is basically like
Mike Lowry. Saying Mike Lowry is
it's wish fulfillment for a teenage American boy.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, there's not, you know, we talk about all the technical expertise and stuff like that. I'm cynic when it comes to that, though. Right. I respect that Bad Boys and Michael Bay did that, but I think as a film in and of itself, there's not a lot to bite onto. It's just it's not there.
No,
it's not it.
That's a fascinating point, because I'm thinking a lot about the legacy and history of kung fu, and it's sort of ironic because like Jackie Chan is the greatest stuntman who ever lived, right? Like I think this movie alone is evidence of that. But he's so relatable. in this, right?
Yes,
and there's
very much
something
so.
about the nature of the stunt work and the action, which, like, this movie, it was one of the most physically demanding movies ever made,
Yeah.
and much, much more so than Bad Boys. But like, somehow it feels democratizing, right? It feels like you watch a kung fu movie and you feel like, oh, like now I want to do kung fu, or like
Yeah.
like I'm thinking about my body this way. With Bad Boys, it's all about gatekeeping, right? Where it's like, no, you don't get it. These guys are supposed to be on another level, right?
Exactly. That's
they're
very
comic
true.
book characters that exist in their own world. Whereas Kung Fu is all about like, hey, like you too could be a Kung Fu master, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah.
There's a level of inspiration to it.
Right.
And there's like this collective sense of awe that when you watch him do this. And it's just sort of like, yeah, it's like watching someone break the Guinness Book of World Records or something. Like, there's just something really cool about it as like everybody's watching it. It's
especially
like
there's that one particular music swell. They play it a couple times. I can't remember if it's in the last scene, but it's definitely in the scene where he's fighting the four guys drunk, and it's in the scene when he's using the bamboo pole.
Yeah.
And like, there's this really great, and it's just like you're so right. It's like watching this movie is like it's a triumph of the human spirit, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's like, how did a human being do some of the things that we're watching Jackie Chan do?
No, it's amazing. What if Michael Bay did a Jackie Chan movie?
Oh my God.
That sounds like Drunken Master 3. I don't know. Sounds like
it would be like watching a strobe light. The cuts would be so fast.
Any closing thoughts here for Bad Boys and Drunken Master 2?
You go to it first, Dan.
I'll go for it very quickly because I finally found this thing that I was looking for. So David Fincher and Michael Bay did work at the same production company.
Amazing.
And what's interesting about this
they both did music videos, right?
Yeah. And so David Fincher, I think, was a little bit before Michael Bay. So Michael Bay is, I think, a little bit younger. He was called Little Fincher at the production company. And I think that's perfect just to think about the foil here of like the route that similar backgrounds, very privileged guys who grew up kind of in the film industry to some degree, taking very different paths in their career. Like, it's like so stark to me. Like, we looking at the game, like think of the game versus Bad Boys. Yeah. Similar verve in kinetic filmmaking, but entirely different nourishment, if you will, out of it, right?
I love the idea that Michael Bay bullied David Fincher, and that's exactly why they ended up where they are, respectively.
I'll let you have the final word, Harry, as our guest, but I did want to just say my kind of closing thoughts is we talked. I mentioned Bullet Train earlier, and in that first episode of this cycle, we also talked about 21 Jump Street and this kind of idea that, in Bullet Train, one of the things that like just makes it fall apart, and we don't think it really has much of a shelf life, is that lack of chemistry. Well, we know that Bad Boys has the chemistry, but the thing that 21 Jump Street had in addition to the chemistry was the jokes. And like Legend of Drunken Master, Drunken Master II, like it has the comedy down. So like I think that's why we're still talking about it so many years later, even as it's like, the last gasp, so to say, of Hong Kong cinema. It's something that just like makes you want to like dive into something that is just like joyous. Like it's maybe I'm reaching here, but I had such a huge smile on my face the first time the credits rolled for 21 Jump Street, and especially with like the last bombastic set piece of Drunken Master 2, I was just like, oh my gosh, like it's just you can't help but just grin. And whereas Bad Boys and Bullet Train, I have nostalgia fighting me for Bad Boys, and yet I still was like, ugh, yeah, that kind of made me feel gross. But it's what it is, and I think that it'll be very interesting as we keep going through this cycle to see which movies kind of give you that kind of exciting feeling like a Bay movie does, objectively, but still doesn't it doesn't leave you feeling nourished, like to use the word you used.
That's so interesting. I haven't seen Bullet Train, so apologies.
No apologies.
No, go see it. Go see it. Enjoy yourself.
I didn't. It didn't look very good to me. But it occurs to me that I have categorically more respect for Bad Boys than I do for something like Bullet Train.
Yeah.
Even sight unseen, which again, if there are Bullet Train fans out there, you can at me and destroy me. But
I can't believe they exist.
Right.
No,
but like
there's none.
at least Bad Boys was trying to be its own thing. Pretty indisputably, right? Like that it's a movie that has such character, right? Like and maybe you can dislike the character and maybe you can dislike what it led to or where it came from, but like Michael Bay was trying to make his own movie, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
absolutely.
like Bullet Train, even the trailer was like, oh, you're trying to do a bunch of other movies. And just sort of like you're trying to go back to Tarantino, you're trying to do like Snatch, you're trying to, and there's something there about like you can wear your influences on your sleeve, but you have to like be your own thing,
Right.
I think that's such a big part of, and I mean, like, I think that's a big part of why Jackie Chan's career endures the way it does, right? Like he was not the first action movie star. He wasn't the first sort of like silent actor age comedian, but he found something new in all of that. And, like it or not, I think that Bad Boys did too. Even if what it
both
found was
endearing
like,
in their own ways.
Yeah, even if what it found was like, oh yeah, I mean, like one of them was like, hey, the greatest stuntman who ever lived is going to make every single other action movie set piece look like garbage from here until the end of time. And Michael Bay was like, hey, what if buddy cop movie but 45% faster? but like they both had their own ideas, so there's something there.
Well, thanks for being on the show, Harry.
Yeah,
what do you guys got coming up on your podcast?
Oh, man. So we're either going to be doing Kuniko Tanaka. She's a Japanese film director from the 70s, I believe.
Yeah.
They're playing a bunch of her movies at the Trylon, and they're impossible to find anywhere else. So if anybody's interested, you should definitely check those out. Or they're also doing Disney movies.
Okay, there you go.
So we'll be doing either of those, I guess. I think next up is probably Snow White, and then we're going to do some Kuniko Tanakas that nobody's ever seen. So, fun stuff.
There you go. Love it.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for having me on, guys. This was so fun.
Thank you. This has been Film Trace.